Mr. Banchiere, could you state for the recording what war and branch of service you served in?
I was in the Army Air Forces in both the World War II in Europe and in the Korean police action.
And what was your rank?
My top rank was first lieutenant.
And where did you serve?
I was based in Italy at Panatella Air Base in Italy of the 464th Bomb Group, and with the 19th Bomb Group in serving out of Okinawa during the Korean War.
When the war broke out, World War II, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
You did. And how old were you at the time?
I was 17 actually.
Do you remember what year that was?
That was 1942 when I enlisted, and I was inducted in January of 1943.
And where were you living at the time?
I was living in Oakmont, Pennsylvania.
What were you doing? Were you out of school? Were you still in school at the time?
No, I was graduated from high school, and I was taking special courses in Pittsburgh and enlisted at that time.
And why did you pick the branch of service that you picked?
Because I've always wanted to fly.
When you enlisted, where were you first sent for your training?
I was first sent to Miami Beach for basic training.
And do you remember your instructors? Was it difficult, the basic training?
I didn't think it was difficult, no. I was in fairly good physical shape, and it's mostly a physical type of thing.
And after Miami Beach, where were you sent?
I was sent to a college training detachment at Huntington, West Virginia for essentially schooling until a flight school opened up for us.
And where was that then?
The flight school or Huntington?
The flight school.
The flight school. The first flight school I went to was at Union City, Tennessee.
Do you think your training prepared you for your service?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. When your training was done, where were you assigned? What was your assignment at that time?
When my training was done, we put a crew together, and I can't remember the air base, but it was up in Massachusetts. I think it was, I don't remember it, but it was Massachusetts, and they put a crew together before we left for overseas.
Did you stay with that crew throughout your time?
I did, yes.
And where did you go then? Where were you sent?
We were sent to Panatella Air Base in that's southern Italy.
Do you remember when you first arrived? What was the most impressive thing to you? What impressed you most?
Just the air base itself and the layout of an air base for combat operations.
What was your rank at that time?
Second lieutenant.
How many men were in your crew?
10, including myself.
And what planes did you fly?
Flew B-24 Liberators, heavy bombers.
Okay, do you remember what the name of your
Well, we flew different aircraft at different times, but most of the time we flew what we called White Queen. It was a Q and it was white, and we called it White Queen.
Did you paint anything on the side of the plane?
No.
Do you remember what was the food like there and the conditions? Did you have enough supplies? Were you put up in barracks or something like that?
No, we lived in tents, 4 people to a tent. The 4 flying officers were living in a tent by themselves. It was a fairly big tent, about 24 by 24, and all it really did was keep our cots. We had a stove, and it was pretty crowded. But we lived there for all the time that we were over there.
Was it uncomfortable? Were you able to sleep, get enough sleep?
Yes, it was fairly comfortable. You make it comfortable. You give it the amenities that you want.
And what was your first assignment, your first mission? Do you recall?
I think it was Linz, Austria, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look at my records to see that.
How did you get your assignments? What was the procedure?
Well, we were told on the bulletin board in the main headquarters building, we were put a list of the crews that were going to fly the next day mission. We were put on the bulletin board, and we'd know by reading the bulletin board.
And how would you know if a mission was successful then, after you'd been on a mission? Would you know right away, or?
You knew pretty much whether you hit the target and all during the mission, because people were watching the ground when they could see the ground. You'd know pretty well whether you hit the target. And if you didn't, most of the time we didn't see it. Pilot, co-pilot, people up in the front never saw what was behind them. But we had a critique after every mission, and you learned during the critique, the problems that we had and what needed correction, how effective the bomb strike was.
You were a pilot, is that correct?
That's right, co-pilot.
Was it crowded were the conditions cramped in the inside of the cockpit?
Somewhat cramped, yeah.
Did you fly formation?
Yes.
You did. I had an interview with a fighter pilot, and a comment that he made struck me, and I just want to run this by you. He flew during World War II, and he said he did not consider himself a hero. He considered the flyers of the bombers the heroes of the air war, and he said it was because of their fortitude, in that they would be flying in formation, and right in front of them a plane might get shot down, but he said they just kept going. Do you agree with that? Do you agree that that was a heroic thing?
Well,
that you couldn't break formation, I guess.
No, you couldn't break formation. You had a mission to accomplish. You were essentially going up there to hit a target, and this is what you did. And you couldn't think about airplanes going down in front of you or left or right of you. You couldn't think about that. The flak was heavy in many cases, and you just hoped that you could drop your bombs and get out of there.
You were very young. Weren't you frightened? Were your feelings of fear, or how did you feel?
You have somewhat fear that you're not going to make it, but I don't think that you. I was never really afraid to do what we were doing.
How long did a normal mission take?
About 8 hours from takeoff and to return. So the average mission was about 7 to 8 hours.
And how many missions were you required to fly?
Well, 35 missions, and you were rotated. It was the general policy at that time.
How many did you fly?
I flew 33 combat missions. The rest of the crew, my crew, flying with other crews and by themselves, essentially, all flew 35 missions. Co-pilots were a little bit behind.
I'm assuming that some of them were called off for reasons also once you were sent out. Were some of them aborted for any reason?
Yes, very few missions were aborted, actually, the mission abortion, but it was mainly due because of weather or some other factor where they didn't figure that the success of the mission was worth it. Some planes would abort themselves because of engine problems or something like that.
Did you feel a difference between the first mission you flew and the subsequent missions, especially the latter ones? Did you become inured to it, or was it the same feeling each time you
Get the
went up?
same feeling all the time.
So you really didn't get used to it as time went
No,
by?
no.
Did you receive any medals during your time in World War II?
The official medals that I received were the air medals with clusters, oak leaf clusters, distinguished service, distinguished unit citations.
And was there any special occasion for getting that medal?
Not really.
That wasn't for
No.
any single
The
mission?
air medals were given after completion of so many missions. It was automatic. It was put on your record, and you got the medals automatically. The unit citation was something that came from Air Force to specific units for doing specific jobs. And you didn't have to do anything really outstanding to receive those type of citations.
I know that at some point you were shot down in your plane. Was any of that during World War II, or was that later?
It was during World War II.
Can you describe that for me? Tell me what happened.
Well, I think we were flying over Munich at that time, and we got shot up pretty bad. Some of our hydraulic systems were out. One engine was out, one engine was running away. We had to feather that. And we didn't quite make it back to base, so we crash landed at a base, near a base in north of what our field was. And everything turned out okay. Nobody was hurt. We landed in a bomb dump.
Nobody on the plane was injured then?
No one was injured in that plane, no.
Do you recall any losses among any of your close friends during World War II?
Two that hurt me the most was, every time I think about this, was Pete Wilson. Really hit me hard, and Frank Quaglia.
And what was their relationship to you? Were they part of your crew?
Frank was part of our crew for a very limited time, but he was a very friendly person, very outgoing, and he made friends very easily. Pete Wilson was another young kid like myself, very, very friendly. And Pete and I did almost everything together until he was downed on. He was with another aircraft that was shot down, and he was killed on the ground. Parachuted okay, but was killed on the ground.
I see. I know from some of the stories that you've told that you were responsible for, was it the liberation of the concentration camps during World War II?
No, I wasn't responsible for it. After the war was over, a few days after we stopped flying combat missions, my plane was set up for return of a lot of equipment, and it had bins in the bomb bays instead of the bomb racks and all. So my crew was given the job to fly amino acids to the Bergen Belsen prison camp. But it was after the war was over.
Can you talk about it?
It's well known, you know, what the Bergen Belsen prison camp was like, and I don't see much in talking about it.
Were there still people there? Were
Oh,
people
yes.
still being liberated when you, I guess that's what the amino acids
Yes.
are for.
The people were still there. Everything was just about the way it was. They were cleaning things up. There was a lot of Germans that were conscripted to help in that, and it was just a terrible experience. You can still smell the camp whenever you talk about it.
Can you tell me what one or two of your most memorable experiences were from World War II?
Well, the first one was my birthday, my 20th birthday. It was our third mission, and that's when we crash landed in the bomb
On
dump.
the day of your birthday?
It was the day of my birthday. That's the first time I smoked a cigarette too. I was shaking. I don't know why, but I was shaking, and someone says, "Have a cigarette; it'll calm you down." And I did, and it did calm me down. I smoked ever since.
You told me a story about that also, that one of your crew members said something to you about that landing. Can you repeat that for the interview?
Well, I didn't make the landing. My pilot did, Joe Calacia, an excellent pilot. He made the landing, and it was a beautiful landing. And one of the guys essentially said that that was the best landing he had ever seen. And it probably was.
Is that the occasion where you were near a bomb? Was it a bomb dump?
It was a bomb dump. It was adjacent to an air base, but it was essentially the bomb dump for that air base. And we were lucky enough to be able to land on a plowed strip that was in that field. We stopped about 50 yards, or 50 feet actually, from a whole pile of fragmentation bombs. If we'd have gone 50 feet more, we might have not been around.
Can you think of another memorable experience from that particular war?
Well, one was that we got shot up pretty bad and lost a lot of altitude whenever we hit north of, I think it was around Regensburg. And we couldn't get over the Alps. We had lost so much altitude. But we were near the Brenner Pass, so we flew down the Brenner Pass. We shot at flak guns above us, actually. And we machine gunned a train and blew it up. We've got pictures of it, actually. And that was a memorable mission. We made it back to base.
When the war was over and your time was up, what did you do immediately after?
Well, I was a pretty good. I think the Colonel Byrd, our group commander, liked me, but he gave me a couple of different missions. We were photographing bomb damage from 500 feet, and I flew 2 of those missions. And we flew 2 weather missions where one of them I got shot up pretty bad, and he essentially gave me combat credit for 38 missions instead of 33.
So you were able to go back home?
Well, the war was over, so I'd have gone back home even with 33 missions. I'm still credited with 33 missions. Colonel Byrd was nice, but it didn't affect the records.
And then the Korean War, and what happened then?
Well, the Korean War was essentially I don't know, it was a different type of war. We were recalled and sent overseas. That was the main reason for us being recalled. We were going to train in B-29s, and we were going to fly missions in Korea. That was the sole reason for our recall.
So where did you first go once you were recalled? Where did they send you?
MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, and then to then to Travis Air Force Base in California, outside of Fairfield, Tucson, it was called then. And from there, overseas.
And where did you land when you went overseas?
Okinawa, finally.
Do you remember your first impression of that place?
It struck me as being a big rock.
What was your rank at that time?
First lieutenant.
And were you a pilot then, or still a co-pilot?
I was co-piloting.
How many missions did you fly during the Korean War?
33 again.
How long were those missions generally?
They were essentially about 12-hour missions, 12 to 13 hours.
Was there anything, you flew B-29s at that time. Was there a big difference between that plane and the B-24 that you had flown?
Well, yes. The B-24 was a muscle airplane. It took muscle to fly it. The B-29 was slower to react, but it was easier to fly.
Was it a larger or smaller
It
plane?
was a larger plane.
Now, I'm assuming you had a different crew, or were you with the same crew that...
With different crews. There was a problem with crews over there. We were essentially sent over there, but when we were at Travis Air Force Base, we were with a bunch of SAC crews. The SAC crews had essentially stayed in after World War II, and they were essentially being held for a possible war with Russia. And we felt we were doing their flying. We were doing their combat operations. And a lot of people didn't care for it. So when we got overseas, we'd lose airplanes, and it looked to me like we'd be flying missions until we got killed. And a lot of people refused to fly. It was the only time I'd ever seen where entire crews claimed a fear of flying and wouldn't fly combat. I flew combat. I felt the same way. I felt that we were being used, that we were expendable, but I wanted to get home. So I continued to fly because I felt that if I did fly missions, I'd maybe get home in 9 to 10 months, whereas if I didn't, I'd be over there for 2 years.
You have a Distinguished Flying Cross. That was from your time in the Korean War?
Yes.
And was that a case where after a few missions you received that, or was that given for a specific mission?
A specific mission. We were flying formation up to North Korea when we got a call that asked if there was any planes with air-bursting bombs on them. And I was flying one, and another crew was flying another one. So they separated us and sent us down to the front lines in North Korea. There was an offensive. The Chinese had a big offensive going, and they wanted our air-bursting bombs to go along the lines and bomb these troops, which we did. And we got the Distinguished Flying Cross for that. They said we stopped the offensive. The 2 airplanes stopped the offensive.
When you flew in formation, can you give me a ballpark figure as to how many actual planes were flying in these formations?
The biggest mission that I remember is about 18 to 20 airplanes.
I read in one of Ernie Powell's books that when the bombers were flying in formation like that, and they all dropped their bombs on a target, that it was like an inferno, that there was so much smoke. Some even talked about the heat from it. Did you experience any of that?
Not really. We flew at pretty high altitude, and I didn't really experience much. You could see the burst if you turned, and you could visually see them. You could see the bursts and all, but I didn't feel any heat or anything like that.
Did you ever feel any compunction about it when you were involved on a mission dropping bombs? Did it bother you in any way?
No. I always felt we were bombing a target, a marshalling yard, a goods depot, a factory, an airdrome. I always felt we were bombing a target, not people.
There were a lot of leftover equipment supplies sent over in the Korean War. Did you have adequate equipment, or was the equipment used from World War II and inadequate for the purpose?
It was inadequate. The B-29 was no match for jet fighters. If the jet fighters were aggressive, and they were any number of them, they could shoot down as many B-29s as they wanted to. It was an airplane that had seen better days.
Did you find them as formidable as the Germans, for instance, in World War II? Your enemy?
The enemy? No, they weren't near as formidable as the Germans were, which is why a lot of us are back here.
Mm-hmm. Again, did you make any close friendships during the Korean War?
One, my bombardier, Jerome McLaughlin. He's the only one that I really felt close to. The rest of them were all, it seemed, up for themselves. Most of them wanted to get home. Some of them were regular Air Force that just wanted to do things to get promotions. They intended to stay in the Air Force whenever everything was done. But I never really formed many friendships except for McLaughlin.
Were most of the men that you flew with seasoned veterans from the World War II, or were they green just coming over for the Korean War?
Most of them were people who were recalled, and they weren't really veterans. At least the crew that I flew with wasn't veteran people. A lot of them were former B-29 people who got out and were called back. Most of them never saw combat in World War II. The recalls did, but the people I flew with weren't. McLaughlin was, of course. He was a World War II bombardier, and
you were injured also during the Korean War. Is that true? Were you shot down again?
No, they brought us back from a mission in a typhoon, and we did get back, but we had headwinds, a lot of headwinds, and we had very little gasoline left. And when we were coming in, we couldn't see the airfield until we got down near the ground, and the GCA, that's ground control approach, was bringing us in because we couldn't see anything. And they'd lose us in the rain and all, and we had to go around once, and we told them that we have to come in, bring us in, you know, as best you possibly can, because we have no fuel left. So when we did come out of the cloud and was able to see the runway of the field, we were to the left of it and headed for a huge coral rock formation near the runways. We banked the plane hard to the right, and when we did, we got vapor lock on all 4 engines, which they'd automatically shut off. So we were able to get to the runway, but we weren't able to bring the ship back, you know, straight. So we come down on one wing, and the one side of the airplane, the wing broke off, the remaining fuel caught fire, and we all got out of it. But of course, we were practically, with the winds that were being blown and against us, we weren't going more than 30 or 40 miles an hour when we hit the runway, I think.
During the Korean War, did you experience many losses among the people that you flew with?
Oh, yeah.
You?
There were several crews that I was familiar with that we trained with at Tampa that were lost.
But none of the people on any of the planes the crew that you were flying with, or yes? Is that what you mean?
The crews were lost. The airplanes and the crews were lost.
Was it more difficult for you in the Korean War leaving a family behind at that time and 2 small children than it was in World War II?
Well, it was definitely, the Korean War was, you know, definitely harder on me, because all you thought about was family, and of course the war itself was something that you didn't want to really do. you didn't understand why you were over there when, you know, somebody else should have been. And you didn't feel like the Air Force cared about you. They didn't want you dead, but they didn't care whether you were or not.
What did you think of your fellow officers in either
You
World
did?
War II?
In
Or the
World War II, I thought we were fairly efficient. I couldn't understand some of the missions that we flew, you know, or where we dropped our bomb. We were a radar airplane. We did some radar bombing. And in a lot of cases, we dropped bombs on targets that we didn't really know why we were bombing them. And to me, we should have brought the bombs back rather than dropping bombs on some village or something. But they did the best they can. I felt that they were competent, dedicated. Korean War was altogether different. I didn't care for the officers. I didn't believe what they were telling us. I thought some of them were cowards. I had no empathy for them whatsoever. Even today, I could care less about them. And it gave me a whole new slant on the Air Force. It gave me a whole new slant on flying. I wanted to do, I hadn't flown since the Korean War.
Is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't covered in this interview?
No, not really. It's you have to give credit to everybody, you know, who served in, particularly in World War II. That I think we had it relatively easy compared to the guys on the ground. And I saw the Fifth Army Front before we bombed close support for the Fifth Army Front in World War II. I saw how these fellows lived, the dangers that they faced, and it was a constant danger. It was day in, day out, hour in and hour out. We essentially flew 8 hours and we were done. We could take a shower, we could have decent food to eat, we could sleep safely. These guys couldn't do that. To me, they're the real heroes.